They called her Ash Tongue because she rarely spoke. They called her Ghost Foot because she moved through the longhouse like a phantom, silent and unseen. They called her Omega, the lowest of the low, a title spat like a curse. Alara knew her real name, but it had been so long since anyone had used it, it felt like a skin she had shed and left behind in the snow. The cold was a constant companion, a predator that gnawed at the marrow of her bones. It lived in the stone floors of the Frostfang Pack's longhouse, a sprawling structure of dark timber and river rock that was always hungry for more wood, more warmth, more life than it could ever hold. Alara's task, as it was every morning before the sun dared to crack the bruised purple horizon, was to feed that hunger. Her fingers were raw, split and bleeding from hauling rough-barked logs from the woodpile. Each splinter was a fresh agony, a sharp reminder of her place. She was a tool, something to be used until it broke. She wore a threadbare tunic, patched so many times it was more stitch than fabric, offering little defense against the wind that sliced like claws through the gaps in the timber walls. Hunger was a hollow ache in her belly, a dull throb that had been with her for as long as she could remember. She was an orphan, a stray pup taken in not from kindness, but from a grudging sense of duty that had long since curdled into resentment. Her parents, she'd been told, were exiles, cast out for some forgotten crime against the pack. Their shame clung to her like a second skin, a permanent stain that marked her as less, unworthy. As she heaved another log onto the pile by the great hearth, Lyra appeared in the firelight. Lyra was the pack alpha's daughter, all sleek muscle, glossy black hair, and eyes the color of winter ice. She was beautiful, and she was cruel. Her cruelty was not the hot, quick anger of a warrior, but the cold, deliberate malice of someone who enjoyed pulling the wings off flies. "Look at it," Lyra sneered, her voice carrying across the empty hall. She gestured at Alara with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Kale, Lyra's intended mate and the pack's lead enforcer, stood behind her, a smirk playing on his lips. His presence was a physical weight, pressing down on Alara's already burdened shoulders. "Still grubbing in the dirt. You'd think it would learn its places outside with the other animals." Alara flinched, her gaze dropping to the floor. She said nothing. Speaking only ever made it worse. Ash Tongue. The name was a shield. Silence was her only armor. "I gave you a task, Omega." Kale's voice was a low growl, meant to intimidate. It worked. "The eastern traps need checking, before sunrise." A knot of ice formed in Alara's stomach. The eastern traps were deep in the woods, a long walk even in good weather. But the wind outside was howling a death song. A storm was coming, a bad one. The elders had been muttering about it for days, their faces grim. To be sent out now was not a task, it was a death sentence. "But the storm!" The words were a whisper, torn from her throat against her will. Lyra laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed in the cold hall. "What's the matter, Ghostfoot? Afraid of a little snow? Perhaps the cold will finally freeze that worthless tongue of yours solid." She stepped closer, her scent of pine and smug superiority filling Alara's senses. She kicked a stray piece of bark at Alara's feet. "Go, or I'll have Kale remind you of the price of disobedience." Kale cracked his knuckles, the sound like bones snapping. The memory of the last time he had reminded her sent a phantom pain blooming across her ribs. She nodded, a jerky, submissive gesture, and turned away from the fire. Its warmth was a paradise she was not allowed to enter. She pushed through the heavy hide flap that covered the entrance and the storm hit her with the force of a physical blow. The wind screamed, tearing at her clothes, stinging her eyes with ice crystals. The world beyond the longhouse was a swirling vortex of white and gray. Visibility was near zero. This wasn't a normal blizzard. It felt wrong, malevolent. Still, she pushed forward. She gritted her teeth against the pain in her fingers and the burning in her lungs, one foot in front of the other. It was the only mantra she had. To stop was to die. To go back was to face Kael's fists and Lyra's venom. Out here, at least, the cold was an honest enemy. It wanted to kill her, but it did not pretend to be anything else. She thought of her parents, the faceless ghosts who had bequeathed her this life of misery. Did they suffer in the frozen waste they were banished to? Or did they find a quick end? Sometimes, in her darkest moments, she envied them that end. It had to be better than this slow, grinding erosion of self, this chipping away of her soul until nothing was left but a hollow shell. But something inside her, a stubborn, flickering ember, refused to be extinguished. It was a tiny spark of defiance that whispered, "Survive. Just one more step. Just one more breath." She would not give Lyra the satisfaction of finding her frozen corpse in the morning. She would not break, not yet. The forest grew thicker, the ancient pines groaning under the weight of the snow. The familiar path to the trapline was gone, buried under a deep, shifting blanket of white. She was lost. The realization settled in her stomach not with a jolt of panic, but with a cold, weary resignation. Of course, this was how it would end. Alone, frozen, forgotten. Her strength was failing. Her legs felt like lead, and a strange, deceptive warmth began to creep into her limbs. She knew what that meant. The final, fatal trick the cold played on the dying. She stumbled, her foot catching on a hidden root, and pitched forward. She didn't fall onto the snow-covered ground. She fell into nothingness. The world became a dizzying tumble of white and dark, the sound of tearing ice and her own thin scream swallowed by the storm. She landed hard on a sloped surface of rock and snow, sliding, scraping, until she came to a jarring halt in a heap. For a moment, she lay there, stunned, the wind knocked out of her. Above, she could see a jagged hole where she had fallen through, a wound in the earth's white skin. She had fallen into a fissure, a deep cleft in the rock hidden by the blizzard. But she was not at the bottom. She was on a wide ledge, sheltered from the screaming wind above. It was a cave of a sort, a pocket of stillness in the heart of the storm's fury. Shivering uncontrollably, she pushed herself up. Pain lanced through her ankle, but it was not broken. She was alive. Bruised, battered, but alive. The ember inside her sputtered, then burned a little brighter. She had survived the fall. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom. The cave was deeper than she first thought, stretching back into darkness. A strange scent hung in the air, something metallic and musky. Blood. And something else. Something wild and powerful, like the smell of a lightning strike. Driven by a primal mix of fear and curiosity, she limped deeper into the cave, away from the opening and the biting cold. The air grew warmer. And then she saw it. A faint, pulsing light, deep in the cavern's throat. It was a soft, golden glow, rhythmic and slow, like a sleeping heart. She crept closer, her bare feet silent on the stone floor. The source of the light was a massive form lying on the ground. At first, she thought it was a bear, or perhaps one of the great northern stags, but as she drew nearer, her breath caught in her throat. It was a wolf. But it was larger than any wolf she had ever seen, larger than the pack's own alpha in his shifted form. Its fur was the color of midnight, thick and deep, but matted with snow and something dark that steamed faintly in the cold air. Blood. A huge, ugly gash ran along its flank, black and angry-looking, oozing a sluggish river of crimson onto the stone. The golden light pulsed from within its chest, a strange, magical luminescence that illuminated the cavern with every beat. This was no ordinary animal. It was a shifter, like her. But the power rolling off it, even in this weakened state, was immense, suffocating. It was an ancient, primal force that made the arrogance of her own pack alpha seem like a child's tantrum. Compassion warred with terror. He was a stranger, a potential threat. But he was wounded, dying. Her own pack had left her to die in the cold. She knew what it was to be alone and in pain. She could not just leave him. Taking a hesitant step forward, she reached out a trembling hand. She needed to see how bad the wound was. Her fingers, numb and blue with cold, brushed against his fevered fur, right at the edge of the raw, torn flesh. The world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a silent detonation of pure energy that erupted from the point of contact. White-hot fire screamed up her arm, searing a path along her veins, straight to her heart. Her vision bleached white, and a roar filled her head, the sound of 1,000 winter storms converging on a single point, on her. She was thrown back, landing hard on the stone floor. Her arm felt like it was on fire, an agony so intense it eclipsed the cold, the hunger, everything. She cried out, clutching her hand to her chest. There, on the back of her hand, a mark was burning itself into existence. It glowed with a furious silver light, an intricate pattern of sharp geometric lines, like a perfect snowflake forged from starlight, interwoven with delicate threads of pure gold. It was a brand, a claim, seared into her very soul. Across the cave, the great wolf convulsed, a groan of pain and something else, something like profound recognition, echoed off the stone walls. The air shimmered around him, and in a dizzying blur of shifting bone and expanding muscle, the wolf was gone. In its place lay a man. He was as massive as the wolf had been, broad-shouldered and long-limbed, built with the harsh, predatory grace of a god of winter. His skin was pale, his hair as black as a starless night sky. He was naked, seemingly oblivious to the cold, his powerful body marred only by the still bleeding wound in his side. And his eyes were open. They were fixed on her, and they burned with the same molten gold that had pulsed from the wolf's chest. The light was no longer faint. It was a raging inferno. Fear, sharp and absolute, paralyzed her. This was him, the Alpha King, Riker. A figure of myth and legend, the supreme ruler of all the northern packs, a being ancient and terrible and powerful beyond comprehension. He was not supposed to be real. And he was looking at her as if he was seeing the sunrise for the first time after 1,000 years of darkness. He pushed himself up on one elbow, his movements stiff with pain but underpinned by an incredible strength. His golden gaze never left her, tracking her every terrified breath. He looked from her face down to the hand she clutched against her chest, the hand that now bore the glowing, impossible mark. A low sound rumbled in his chest, too deep to be human, too resonant for a mere wolf. It was the sound of mountains shifting, of glaciers cracking. He spoke, and his voice was the deep thunder of an avalanche, yet it held a softness, a raw, possessive tenderness that terrified her more than any shout could have. You. The single word hung in the air, a binding pronouncement. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, an undeniable truth that settled over her like a weighted cloak. What was happening? Her mind screamed, a maelstrom of confusion and terror. The pain in her arm was a constant, burning reminder that this was real. The mark on her skin pulsed in time with the golden light in his eyes. A connection, tangible and terrifying, now stretched between them. It was a taut wire of energy that hummed with a power she could feel in her teeth. Her instincts, the omega part of her that had been beaten into submission for years, were screaming at her to submit, to bare her throat. But her fear, the fear of a small, helpless thing cornered by a predator, urged her to run, to flee into the storm and take her chances with the cold. He saw the conflict in her eyes. He saw her terror. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself into a sitting position, hissing as the movement pulled at the gash in his side. He ignored the pain, his focus entirely on her. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, his voice softer now, a careful, deliberate rumble. But the possessiveness was still there, an unshakable undercurrent. It was in the way his eyes devoured her, in the slight flare of his nostrils as he scented the air. She tried to speak, to ask who he was, what this mark meant, but only a choked gasp escaped her lips. Ash Tongue. The name was a cage she had built for herself, and now she was trapped inside it. "I have been searching," he continued, his gaze intense enough to feel like a physical touch, "for a very long time." He began to move toward her, crawling because he was too injured to stand. The motion was agonizingly slow, but inexorable. He was a force of nature, and she was a sapling in his path. She scrambled backward, her scraped hands finding no purchase on the smooth stone. Her back hit the cold, unyielding wall of the cave. There was nowhere else to go. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cavern's chill. He smelled of pine and winter storms and fresh blood. He smelled of power. "Yours," he said, his golden eyes flicking down to the glowing brand on her hand. Then his gaze lifted back to hers, fierce and absolute. "Mine." The words resonated through the bond between them, and her mark flared with heat. It wasn't a question or a request, it was a declaration, a claiming. In the ancient laws of their people, the soul bond was the most sacred, most unbreakable connection that could exist. It was a legend, a myth told to pups around the fire, a fated, perfect match, a joining of souls so complete that a mark would appear, a physical manifestation of their union. But it wasn't supposed to be real, and it wasn't supposed to happen to someone like her, not to the Ghostfoot, the Omega, the worthless, nameless girl. Her mind recoiled from the impossibility of it. He had to be mistaken. This was some kind of fever dream brought on by the cold. "No," she whispered, the word fragile and broken. I'm nothing." A flicker of something, anger, pain, regret, crossed his face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that unshakable certainty. "You are everything," he growled, the sound vibrating in her very bones. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and calloused, a warrior's hand. He didn't touch her. He just held it in the space between them, an invitation, a demand. Let me see. She hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her body wanted to obey. The bond, this strange new part of her, yearned for his touch, for the connection to be completed. But her mind, scarred by years of abuse, screamed that this was a trick, another cruelty, the grandest and most terrible of them all. But the pain in her arm, and the pleading, desperate hope in his golden eyes overrode her fear. Slowly, shakily, she uncurled her fingers and held out her hand. The silver and gold mark pulsed with a soft, steady light in the gloom. He took her hand. His touch was not forceful or rough. It was impossibly gentle, his large, warm fingers closing around hers with a reverence that stole her breath. The moment his skin met hers again, the bond flared. It was not the explosive agony of before, but a deep, resonant hum, a wave of warmth and rightness that flowed through her, chasing away the bone-deep chill for the first time in years. It felt like coming home. A ragged sigh escaped his lips. He brought her hand closer, examining the mark as if it were the most precious jewel in the world. He traced the glowing lines with his thumb, and everywhere he touched, pleasant shivers ran up her arm. The pain receded, replaced by a tingling warmth. "It is more beautiful than the legends described," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. He looked up at her, and the raw adoration in his gaze made her want to weep. No one had ever looked at her like that. No one had ever truly seen her at all. Suddenly, a sound from above shattered the moment. The scrape of boots on rock, the murmur of voices carried on the wind. "Down here! The snow gave way! There's a fissure!" It was Cale's voice. Riker's head snapped up, his expression instantly transforming from tender awe to feral menace. A low growl started deep in his chest. He moved with surprising speed for an injured man, placing his body between Alara and the opening above. He was shielding her, protecting her. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice no longer soft, but the hard, sharp crack of a king giving an order. Fear, cold and familiar, flooded back into Alara's veins, washing away the fleeting warmth of the bond. Cale, Lyra. They had found her. Her tormentors had followed her even here, to this impossible secret place. A rope snaked down from the opening, and a moment later, Cale slid down, landing with a soft thud on the snowy ledge. He held a lit torch, its flickering light casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the cave walls. His eyes scanned the darkness, widening in shock as he took in the scene. He saw the massive, naked man, the blood, and then his gaze fell on Alara, huddled behind him. He saw the glowing mark on her hand. His smirk was gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, which quickly morphed into avaricious cunning. He did not recognize Riker by face. Few had seen the Alpha King in centuries. But he recognized the raw power, the unmistakable aura of command. And he understood the significance of the soul mark. "Well, well," Cale said, his voice dripping with a false, oily charm. "What have we found here, little Omega?" Lyra appeared at the edge of the hole above them. "Cale? What is it?" "Our worthless stray has found herself a very powerful friend," he called back up, his eyes never leaving Riker. He took a step forward. "I don't know who you are, stranger, but that thing you're protecting belongs to the Frostfang pack." Riker's growl deepened, vibrating through the stone floor. "She belongs to no one but herself, and to me." Cale's eyes narrowed, a flicker of understanding dawning. He had heard the old tales, the prophecies of the Alpha King and his fated mate. His gaze fixed on Alara again, but now he wasn't looking at a worthless Omega. He was looking at a prize, a key, a weapon to be used. He was an ambitious man, secretly aligned with a shadowy faction known as the Ember Covenant, a group that sought to overthrow the old rulers and seize power. And he had just stumbled upon the one thing that could make that a reality. "We'll see about that," Cale sneered. He drew a long, wicked-looking knife from his belt. The blade glinted, not with the dull sheen of steel, but with the cold, dead light of silver. Riker tensed, preparing to launch himself forward, injury be damned. But before he could move, Cale spoke again, his voice slick with poison. "Take one more step, and I'll shout for my men to kill her. They have silver-tipped arrows. Even you can't stop them all before one finds her heart." It was a bluff, but a good one. Riker froze, his golden eyes blazing with helpless fury. He was trapped. He could kill Cale in a heartbeat, but he couldn't protect Alara from the threat above. Alara's world tilted. Cale wasn't just threatening her, he was using her. Using her against this powerful stranger who had looked at her with such reverence. The familiar feeling of being a pawn, a worthless object to be bartered and broken, washed over her. The hope that had sparked in her chest moments before was cruelly snuffed out. "Now," Cale said, gesturing with his silver knife, "you're going to come with me, both of you." More of Cale's men slid down the ropes, their faces hard and merciless. They carried heavy chains, also laced with the dull gleam of silver. Riker looked at Alara, and in his eyes she saw not defeat, but a promise. A vow of bloody retribution that was so fierce it made her shiver. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He was surrendering. For her. The men advanced, their movements cautious. They threw a silver-laced net over Riker, and the moment the metal touched his skin, he roared in agony. The potent magic of the silver burned him, sapping his strength, dampening his power. His golden eyes flickered, the light dimming. Two of the men grabbed Alara. One of them twisted her arm behind her back, his grip brutal. The other clamped a silver manacle around her wrist, right over the soul mark. The pain was instantaneous and blinding. It was a cold, acidic fire, not just on her skin, but deep inside, as if the silver was trying to burn the bond itself out of her. She cried out, a thin, wretched sound. Through his own pain, Riker lunged, straining against the net, his roar of fury shaking the very foundations of the cave. "Do not touch her!" Cale backhanded Alara across the face, the blow snapping her head to the side. "Silence her!" he snarled. One of the men stuffed a dirty rag in her mouth. Tears streamed down her face, tears of pain and utter despair. They were dragged out of the cave, up into the raging heart of the storm. The blizzard seemed to have intensified, its fury a reflection of the rage in Riker's heart. They were forced onto horses and led away, deeper into the white, unforgiving wilderness. The journey was a blur of pain and misery. The silver manacle on her wrist was a source of constant, gnawing agony. But worse than that was the feeling of the bond being stretched and strained. It felt like a part of her soul was being forcibly torn away. With every mile that separated them, the connection to Riker grew thinner, colder. She could feel his pain as if it were her own, his rage, his desperation. And she could feel his strength fading under the relentless assault of the silver. They traveled for what felt like days, stopping only to rest the horses. Alara was given no food, only mouthfuls of snow to quench her thirst. She was kept separated from Riker, who was bound in a cage on a heavy wagon, a prisoner in his own lands. His golden eyes, now dimmed to a dull bronze, followed her every move, filled with a torment that mirrored her own. Finally, they arrived at their destination. It was not a pack longhouse, but a grim, black fortress of volcanic rock, half hidden in a remote, windswept mountain pass. It seemed to absorb the light, radiating a palpable aura of cold and wrongness. This was a place of dark magic, a stronghold of the Ember Covenant. She was dragged from her horse and thrown into a cell. It was little more than a stone box, deep in the fortress's belly. There was no window, no light, only a single torch sputtering outside the iron-barred door. The cold here was different from the clean cold of the wilderness. It was a damp, stagnant chill that seeped into her soul and smelled of decay and forgotten things. The silver manacle was chained to the wall. The bond was now a thread, thin and frayed. The warmth she had felt in the cave was a distant memory, a cruel dream. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on her, crushing the air from her lungs. She was back where she started. No, this was worse. Before, she had been invisible. Now, she was a prisoner. Before, she had been alone. Now, she had been shown a glimpse of what it meant not to be, only to have it ripped away. Hours or days passed. Time had no meaning in the darkness. Her hope dwindled, the ember inside her finally turning to ash. Cale had been right. She was worthless. A stray who had stumbled into a game far too big for her, and now she would be the piece that was sacrificed. The door to her cell creaked open. It was not Cale who entered, but a different man, tall and gaunt, wrapped in shadows that seemed to cling to him like a cloak. His face was a pale mask of aristocratic disdain, and his eyes held no light at all, only a chilling, absolute emptiness. A wave of profound dread washed over her. This was a being of immense, ancient evil. "So," the man said, his voice a dry, sibilant whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "This is the vessel, the key to the king's heart." He glided closer, his movements unnervingly smooth. He studied her as one might study an interesting insect before crushing it. "You are a disappointment, small, weak, insignificant." This was him, Lord Malachor, the Shadow King, the leader of the Ember Covenant. "But your blood," he continued, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips. "Your connection to him, that is not insignificant at all. The soul bond is a conduit, a channel. He draws strength from you, from the land through you. A flaw in his design, a flaw I intend to exploit." He paced before her cell, his shadowy form seeming to flicker and warp in the torchlight. "For centuries, Riker has been invincible, his power tied to the very heart of the North. But with you, I can sever that connection. I will use this bond, this pathetic little romance, to poison him from the inside out. I will drain you, and through you, I will drain him. And all his power, all his dominion, will become mine." He laughed, a sound with no warmth, no humor. It was the sound of breaking glass, of dying hopes. He looked at her, his dead eyes boring into hers. "He cannot save you. He is chained in silver, his power a flickering candle in a hurricane. By the time the moon is full tomorrow night, he will be a hollow shell, and you will be a memory. a necessary but ultimately worthless sacrifice. Malachor turned and swept from the room, the darkness seeming to follow in his wake. His words were a death sentence, delivered with casual, absolute certainty. The last of Alara's strength gave out. She slumped against the wall, the cold stone leaching what little warmth she had left. This was it. The end. He was right. She was insignificant, a flaw, a weakness that would be the undoing of the one person who had ever looked at her and seen something of worth. Tears of shame and despair traced paths through the grime on her cheeks. It was all her fault. She closed her eyes, wishing for the end to come quickly. And then, in the deepest, darkest pit of her despair, she felt it. A flicker. A tiny, fragile spark of warmth against the agonizing cold of the severed bond. It was faint, a whisper in a tempest, but it was there. Hold on. The voice was not a sound. It was a thought, a feeling, projected across the distance, forcing its way through the silver's dampening effect. It was his voice. Riker. Alara. He knew her name. How did he know her name? She had never told him. He spoke it in her mind with a reverence that made her heart ache. Do not give up. Do not let him win. I feel you. Hold on to me. The connection was weak, strained, but it was a lifeline. He was still fighting. For her, chained and weakened, he was still reaching for her, pouring what little strength he had left into this one desperate connection. I am coming. That promise, that impossible vow, rekindled the ember in her soul. It was no longer just a spark of survival. It was fanned by his strength, his will. It began to glow. She would not be a sacrifice. She would not be his weakness. She would hold on. She would fight. The next day, she was dragged from her cell and taken to a vast circular chamber at the heart of the fortress. The air was thick with the stench of dark magic. In the center of the room, Riker was chained to a massive stone altar. He was shirtless, his powerful torso crisscrossed with silver chains that sizzled where they touched his skin. His head was bowed, his black hair hiding his face, but she could feel his consciousness, a grim, defiant presence. Malachor stood before the altar, chanting in a guttural language that made the stones vibrate. Kale was there, his face alight with triumphant glee. Lyra, too, had somehow found her way here, her expression a mask of jealous hatred as she looked at Alara. "The moon is full," Malachor announced, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "The ritual begins." Alara was forced onto her knees before the altar. Malachor approached her, holding a black obsidian knife. "Your part is simple, little Omega," he hissed. "You just have to bleed." He raised the knife. At the altar, Riker lifted his head. His eyes met Alara's. The golden light was almost gone, reduced to mere pinpricks in the darkness, but they burned with a ferocious, untamable love. "I am with you," his thoughts whispered. As Malachor's knife descended, a sound like a thunderclap shattered the air. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of the fortress's main gate being torn from its hinges. Shouts of alarm and the clash of steel erupted from the corridors outside. Kale's head whipped around. "What is that?" A massive warrior, clad in white fur and steel armor, appeared in the doorway, a greatsword in his hand. "For the king!" he roared, and behind him poured a tide of elite soldiers, the legendary Winter Guard. Riker's forces had arrived. The chamber erupted into chaos. The Winter Guard crashed into the Covenant soldiers, and the room became a maelstrom of flashing blades and battle cries. Malachor snarled in frustration, his attention diverted from the ritual. "Deal with them! Finish the ritual!" he shrieked at Kale. Kale, his face a mask of panic and fury, turned his attention back to Alara. He lunged for her, his own silver knife in his hand. "If I can't have the power, no one will," he screamed, his eyes wild. He would kill her and sever the bond permanently. But seeing the Winter Guard, seeing that Riker had not been bluffing, that he had summoned an army for her, had changed something in Alara. The ember of her spirit was no longer a flicker. It was a growing flame. At the altar, Riker threw his head back and roared. It was a sound of pure, primal power, a challenge to his enemies and a call to his mate. With a monumental effort of will, he strained against his bonds. The silver chains glowed red-hot, and with a sound of screaming, tearing metal, one of them snapped. Malachor, seeing his control slipping, turned his full power on Riker, blasting him with a torrent of black, corrupting energy. Riker cried out, his body convulsing as the dark magic washed over him. Seeing him in such agony, seeing the man who had called her everything being torn apart, shattered the last of Alara's fear. It shattered the cage of silence she had lived in her entire life. Something ancient and powerful inside her broke free. It was not fear that filled her now. It was rage. A pure, white-hot, protective fury. "No!" The word was not a whisper. It was a physical force, a shockwave of sound and power that blasted out from her. The air in the chamber cracked with energy. A blinding, silver-white light erupted from her body, from the soul mark on her hand. It was not the gentle glow of before, but a nova, an explosion of pure, untamed life force. The light washed over everything. It struck Kale, who was mid-lunge. He screamed as the pure energy hit him, his body dissolving into ash and smoke before he could even hit the ground. The wave of light slammed into the Covenant soldiers, who shrieked and fell back, their dark magic evaporating like mist in the sun. It struck the wounded Winter Guard, and their injuries sealed over, their strength returning in a rush. And it struck Riker. The silver chains holding him melted into slag. The black, corrupting energy from Malachor dissolved, and the golden light in his eyes, in his chest, roared back to life, brighter and more powerful than ever before. He stood, free and whole, his gaze fixed on Alara with utter, soul-shaking awe. Malachor stared, his empty eyes wide with disbelief and something that looked like fear. What are you?" he stammered. "That is not the power of a shifter. That is the power of creation, the light of the first moon." Alara rose to her feet. The light swirled around her, a corona of silver and gold. She felt a power thrumming through her veins she had never known she possessed. She was not a healer. She was a life-bringer, a spirit weaver, a queen. She looked at the Shadow King, the being who had called her insignificant. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and strong, ringing with an authority that was ages old. "I am not worthless," she declared, the words a judgment. "I am not a sacrifice. I am his." She raised her hand, the mark blazing like a star. "And he is mine." She pointed a finger at Malachor, and a concentrated beam of pure white light shot from her hand. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of purification. It struck the Shadow King, and he screamed, a terrible, unearthly sound. His shadowy form began to unravel, to dissipate under the cleansing light. He was not killed, but broken, his power shattered. With a final, hate-filled shriek, his form dissolved into nothing but a wisp of black smoke, which fled from the chamber and was gone. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the panting of the warriors. The battle was over. The covenant was broken. The Shadow King was vanquished. The silver light around Alara receded, flowing back into her, leaving her standing, swaying with exhaustion, in the center of the chamber. She looked at Riker. He was already moving toward her, his long strides eating up the distance between them. He stopped before her, his golden eyes blazing with a universe of emotions. Awe, relief, gratitude, and a love so profound it felt like the foundation of the world. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle as the first snowfall. His thumb stroked her cheeks, wiping away tears she hadn't even realized she was crying. "You were magnificent," he finally breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved us. You saved me." "You came for me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You called me by my name." "Alara," he said, and her name from his lips was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "I have known your name for 500 years. It has been carved on my heart, waiting for the day I would find you." He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her in a fierce, possessive embrace. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling his scent, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. The bond between them flared to life, no longer a thin, painful thread, but a roaring, joyful river of warmth and light and love. It filled all the empty, broken places inside her, making her whole. She felt a warmth on her own hand and looked down. The mark was blazing. She looked at his hand, which rested on the small of her back. There, on the back of his own hand, a matching mark now glowed, a brand of midnight and shadow interwoven with the same silver and gold. The bond was complete, equal. She reached up, her hand that bore the mark, and placed it flat against his heart. "Mine," she whispered, claiming him as he had claimed her. He let out a shuddering breath and lowered his head, his forehead resting against hers. "Yours," he vowed, "now and for all time." They returned not to the Frostfang Pack, but to Winter's Heart, the capital of the north, a breathtaking city of white stone and gleaming ice, carved into the side of the highest mountain. When they arrived, the entire city was gathered in the great plaza. Thousands of shifters, the alphas of every pack in his domain, their warriors, their people, all stood waiting. Riker led her to the great balcony of the citadel, which overlooked the plaza. He stood beside her, his hand holding hers, their marks glowing for all to see. "People of the North!" His voice boomed, magically amplified to carry over the entire city. "For centuries, your king has been alone. Our throne has been half empty. Our heart has been incomplete. Today, that changes." He turned to her, his golden eyes soft and filled with pride. He lifted her hand and kissed the soul mark. "You knew me as your king," he declared to the crowd. "But she is my life. She is the light that banished the shadow. She is the soul of our people, the heart of our land. Behold Alara, my mate, my equal." He looked at her, a slow, beautiful smile spreading across his harsh features, a smile like the sunrise after a long winter. "Your queen." A moment of stunned silence, and then the crowd erupted. A single unified roar of joy and approval shook the very foundations of the city. They were not cheering for a king's prize. They were cheering for their queen, the woman of light who had saved them all. Alara looked out at the sea of faces, at the cheering people, and felt the last of her old self, the ash tongue, the ghost foot, the omega, fall away like dust. She was home. She was loved. She was seen. She squeezed Riker's hand and he squeezed back, a silent promise of a future she had never dared to dream of. The cold was gone, replaced by a warmth that she knew would last forever.